What do you mean feel? You got to break down. What do you mean feel discriminated against?
I think that's horrific, but
Well, what?
I don't know
why
how
is
to
that
fix it.
horrific? It's 1
I
in
think that
5.
number should be
And-
0. I don't understand why anyone would ever treat somebody differently other
Well, how
than
do you-
just treat them like a human.
Oh, wait, hang on. Can someone respond to that? He doesn't know. He's saying he doesn't know why somebody is treating someone differently.
I'd say it's pretty rare, not occasionally.
Oh, but we very rarely. But once in a while it happens.
Yeah, like a few times a year maybe. Like,
Okay, well, that could be occasionally.
yeah, I guess
don't know what
it's up to
people mean.
interpretation. You know.
So you decided occasionally doesn't mean a few times a year, but someone else does. So like, all right.
Yeah, like,
And meanwhile, this white guy right here with the mustache is saying like, oh, this is horrible. And I look at, I don't know, Sports Illustrated, I don't know, whatever I look at, all I see are black athletes, man. They're telling their stories. I'm like, I don't know what you're looking at, but I'm just looking at nothing but black people having their stories told in the world of sports. Be me for a second. We're all me up here doing this. How do we know when we're being fair?
To an extent, like, do you consider that discrimination, or are you just somebody special who just came in?
Dude, is that discrimination? So there was a Gallup poll, and they polled lots of people, college students, but they asked one of the things they asked black college students is like, how often do you feel discriminated against at your college or university? 21% of black undergrads, that's 1 out of 5, said like, yeah, they feel frequently or occasionally feel discriminated against. When you graduate college, okay, when and how are you going to be able to weigh in on this as to whether that's meaningful or not meaningful, or you hear that and what do you do with that information?
Well, for me personally, like, I want to work in communications. I want to do like journalism. So I want to be like sharing people's stories, especially like in the sports world. And I feel like with a lot of athletes right now, especially like, I don't want to like belittle anything that like athletes of color, but especially them and women in the like sports industry, a lot of the breakthroughs that they're making right now are really underrepresented because they feel like they don't get the like recognition they deserve or nobody talks about it. And so, especially for my field of work that I'm trying to go into, I feel like I'm going to see this stuff a lot. Like, and you said it in like a meaningful way, like how am I going to be able to weigh in on it? As like a biracial woman, like woman of color trying to work in like a male-dominated industry, like I'm not only trying to do that for myself, but I'm trying to do it for the people that I know are underrepresented and their short stories aren't shared. So like answering like that piece of like the meaningful of it, like I'll be able to weigh in there and share those people's stories and be like, you know, this is how, like, be able to communicate that, like the communications of journalism will be able to come out.
Okay, all right, so listen. We need something opposite. They're very different from that.
I would want to like see what the context is behind each like instance where they said they felt like they were discriminated against.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's like easy, like if you get in like a misunderstanding or anything like that with someone, it's easy to assume like, oh, it's only because of like my race or something. Like sometimes like my mom, when like she like goes shopping and is like trying to like barter or something, she'll feel like she was discriminated against because of her race. And like I'd be there and be like, I don't think it had anything to do with your race. I think it's just because you were trying to like haggle.
What do you mean feel? You got to break down. What do you mean feel discriminated against? Like what are we really talking about? How about something else? Because Anais said something that was very, very left, very liberal, very, very liberal. Like so. Do you have something else? Because here, can I just explain this? Our job is to break this down. If we just accept Anais, that's a singular perspective. But her perspective is not the perspective. That's just one. So, like, give us another one. Yeah.
A perspective I had was more of how these people around them, because would they be discriminated against the institution itself, or is it against their Penn State experience, about like people that are around them, about things they see, things they participate in?
Okay.
So I think that would be another way to also look at the question and at the data.
Okay. All right. There's one. All right. So what angle are we looking at? Somebody else.
I think that's horrific, but
Well, what?
I don't know
why
how
is
to
that
fix it.
horrific? It's 1
I
in
think that
5.
number should be
And-
0. I don't understand why anyone would ever treat somebody differently other
Well, how
than
do you-
just treat them like a human.
Oh, wait, hang on. Can someone respond to that? He doesn't know. He's saying he doesn't know why somebody is
I don't
treating
understand
someone
it.
differently.
Yeah, I mean, I was also, because you also need to look at the fact or the data about the other populations, not only at the black and graduate students. Like, what about the Latinos? Do we feel discriminated
What
or
about
not?
white students? Yeah, but
and
dude-
how many of us?
Okay, he just said nobody should feel discriminated against, right? Is your mom? You just said my mom feels discriminated against in all sorts of situations where she's not discriminated against. Okay, so can you respond to him?
How would you know that they feel like they're being discriminated against because of like their race or something like that, and not something they did that was like wrong?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
Like, how do you even figure out an answer to that? Is that something then you ask them when you're asking that question? Because then you need an answer to that question.
Yeah, but you
in
just,
what circumstance?
But you just jumped in immediately and said, "Oh, this is horrible," as assuming that the 21% means something. Dude, the 21% could mean 1% of them said, "I occasionally feel discriminated against." Okay? In the 1%, 20% are occasionally, because they combine them together. And 1% is like, oh yeah, I frequently feel discriminated against, okay?
Yeah.
What does that mean? So can you break that down? You're saying it's horrible. What about occasionally? What's occasionally? Once
I was
a
gonna say
year,
that's what I was
once
like. It is. He is right. Like, the context really matters. You know what I mean?
No, the numbers matter. How often would you say your mom occasionally feels discriminated against?
I'd say it's pretty rare, not occasionally.
Oh, but we very rarely, but once in a while it happens.
Yeah, like a few times a year maybe. Like,
Okay, well, that could be occasionally.
yeah, I guess
don't
it's
know what
it's up
people
to
mean.
interpretation. You know.
So
don't-
you decided occasionally doesn't mean a few times a year, but someone else does. So like, all right.
Yeah, like
And meanwhile, this white guy right here with the mustache is saying like, oh, this is horrible. And you're going like, well, what's so horrible about it? I don't know. Once it happened to my mom once. Like, I don't know. Like, you've already taken a position. Now, you've taken that position. You took a very left position. Our job up here is to be fair to the issues. So we got to be fair to this and break it down. Like, I don't know. Like, what are you really talking about? Discriminated against, right? What are you talking about?
Yeah, and also it doesn't specify which type of discrimination.
Yeah.
So this would also be something we would need to analyze further.
Okay,
To
all right, that's
have a
cool.
more educated response.
So you could go back to Anais. You said like, do we have all these athletes of color and they feel like they don't get their stories out? And I'm like, I get on my phone and I look at, I don't know, Sports Illustrated, I don't know whatever I look at. All I see are black athletes, man. They're telling their stories. I'm like, I don't know what you're looking at, but I'm just looking at nothing but black people having their stories told in the world of sports. So now you put that out there, and I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily it. I don't know.
There are a lot of athletes, especially black athletes, who are getting their stories shared, but kind of going back to like what Luis was saying, like what about the Latinos? What about the Asian
Okay, all
athletes?
right.
What about women?
The
There are so many.
Japanese Mexican
Yeah,
athletes.
they're like, I know I have a lot of friends who aren't like black or like
Okay.
Latino, who are very like marginalized communities that
Yeah.
don't get spoken about. And I feel like with them, their stories don't get shared, like because people kind of generalize them to the greater population that they might
All
fall
right, okay.
into. And
Okay.
so like that's what I'm saying, like kind of talking more about like not the broader perspective, but like the little things
All
that
right,
people
okay.
don't really look at like in those
all right.
stories.
Okay, that's fair. All right, that's fair. All right. Okay, so I have a question. Jamie actually has a question. How do we know when we're being fair? Be me for a second. We're all me up here doing this. How do we know when we're being fair?
Since we are trying to be fair to them, we would need to have their perspective on the topic. So just a client view on what we're trying to do.
Well, you're also
would be
being
it.
fair to these 21% of the students, but you also want to be fair to the other 79%, and you also want to be fair to the people who they claim, who they are saying are doing the discrimination. Because, like, people sometimes say that I discriminate against people, and I'm like, wait, hang on a second. I'll get emails like, you know, you really discriminated against so I'm like, what the Wait, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, be fair to me. Like, what did I do? Like, what do you mean? Like, because anybody can say, you're not telling my story. I'm like, we didn't tell your story, but we just told the story of a dozen other people that look like you, that are like you. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't tell your story, but you didn't tell my story either. So, like, it just goes on. You know what I mean? So how do we know when we're being fair?
I feel like one way to kind of like know when you're being fair, and like you were saying, like people will be like, well, you shared a story, not my story, is giving people like a platform to say stuff like this. Like this class is like a way for people to talk about the things and the way that they see things and the experiences that they go through. I feel like that's one way that you're kind of distributing that fairness, like, and giving it out is a way for people to have that like way to talk about it and like give them essentially the platform to tell their story, talk about the things that they've been through.
Okay. But not everybody can have a platform, okay? So how do you know when are we being fair? Because if we had stopped here, we need to be fair from the other side. Like, how do you know we're being fair?
I don't really think people are, like, most of the time I don't think people are fair. I think they have like their own opinions. Maybe
they have
like
their own biases.
They have their own biases. They might not even be aware of them. But
what are the signs that they have their own biases?
I guess like for this example, like if they already like make an opinion just based on like this one statement.
Yeah.
But there's like still a lot of information that we don't know. Like, oh, what was the context? Like, what really happened?
Yeah, we know nothing at all, right? We just know that how important is it for you all? Now I'm going to take a very different perspective. The four of you, you're going to go out in the world. You don't want to discriminate against people, right? You don't want to discriminate against trans people. You don't want to discriminate against black people, brown people, Mexican people, Japanese people, Brazilians, whatever it is, Indians, bro. Indian mothers that like to barter in shops, right? What do you have to do? Like, when are you going to learn? How often are you going to sit down and talk to black Americans or black people to say, hey, man, tell me about your experience? Like, once you get out into the world, if you're not friends with people, if you're not having those kind of intimate conversations, how are you going to ever know how to even break this down? Like, how would you know that?
I don't even know that it's really possible to know that because every person changes. It's about the individual. That's why it's hard to that's why race politics is difficult because you can't create umbrella decisions for a group of people. Like everybody's different, and I think that's extremely patronizing. You know what I mean?
It is, but it's also patronizing what you said earlier.
When
you said, "Oh, this is horrible," without saying wait, hang on a second, I don't know if this is horrible. Like, what the hell? That's
I
also
just
patronizing.
take discrimination as not a good thing.
Okay, I got that, but also, how good is it to let people, for example, that people can say, I have this discrimination experience, and we don't tell them, wait, hang on a second. Like you with your mom. If you don't tell your mom, hey, mom, that person did not discriminate against you. You're just bartering in a place that has price tags, Mom. Like, what the you can't barter here. Like, they're not going to barter. It's patronizing for me to not treat your mother with the respect of being a full person. You know what I mean? Like, that's also patronizing. What have we missed? What other things do we need to point out here?
I also think that another thing that should be talked about when we're talking about this issue is, because we're discussing about fairness, right? So
no, we're discussing about being intellectually. So the original ideas. When do we know? At what point do we know we're on solid ground intellectually and so on, that we really can say something that's meaningful without being complete morons?
Right. And another thing that you also kind of have to consider is could you appease everybody?
No. Yeah, right. Okay, got it.
Is it possible for you to appease everybody? Because if it's not a possibility, then why do you still pursue it?
So here, I'll give you one, because there are a lot of black students out in this classroom, just for example, who are saying You don't have any black people up here asking this question, right? So like, oh, all right, so yeah, all right, dude, does that mean we need to have black people up here to answer the question? It's like, well, no, we don't, because that's not what this is. But still, we can't appease everybody.
I also have an example because so in Texas, I used to go to a church. It was a Korean church, so everyone there were Korean. One day, one of the church members got a boyfriend who was black, right? And he got all the attention in the whole church. He was special. He's the only one who couldn't speak Korean. He's the only one who was black. He's the only one who's an outsider.
Just because he went to the Korean church?
Yeah, just because he's dating somebody in Korean church. And when we discussed about, like casually, he does say that he felt a bit discriminated.
Even though they were uplifting him.
Even uplifting, it's just extra attention.
Yeah, all right, okay.
So, to an extent, like, do you consider that discrimination, or are you just somebody special who just came in?
Dude, is that discrimination? In a way, it can be.
If I feel like in a way, yes.
Wait, but hang on though.
I know. I was gonna.
No, you're
say.
the one that said people
Yeah,
want to tell
I know.
their
I was gonna
stories.
get there.
All right, okay. all
Yeah,
right.
I was gonna say in a way, yes, but then in a way, like I also kind of don't think so.
Right.
But then, like I can see where it would come from, like a place of feeling discriminated against because you are being singled out. You are the one, like
Yeah.
everybody's looking and pointing fingers at you in a way.
Yeah.
I can see why it would be discrimination in that way. But then in the same way, it's also like I see it in a way of appreciating it, like
Okay.
in
All
a
right.
way of like he was saying, like it's an uplifting thing. But I can see why it would be taken as a discrimination.
So
And,
maybe-
yeah, and also like to add scrutiny to the statistics, I'm gonna talk about my experience because I grew up in a white neighborhood. So now I'm the only yellow kid in the whole school, right? And everybody's just like, and in the early
Were you wearing Johnny Cash shirts back then?
No, but everyone in the early 2000s, the only thing people knew about Asia was Samurai Jack and Jackie Chan. Right? That's it. And that's all the reception that I got. But I never perceived it as discrimination. I'm just like, yeah, I'm Jackie Chan. I do kung fu, despite the fact that I'm Korean.
So you didn't. So
Yeah, so that's what I mean about the statistics is that the people who said they were discriminated are probably that black dude in the church. But also people like me who was also
or who actually really did feel discrimination.
Or
'Cause
that too.
I've experienced, because there are people that experience really definitive acts of discrimination. Right.
But it's what I'm trying to say is that even amongst that single statistics, there's so many outliers that are omitted or added that you really can't take that for value.
And yet, but at the same time, it's 21%. It's not, when I see it, I'm 1 in 5. And I'm like, wait, hang on a second. If we just look at black students in the class, 1 in 5, on average, would say, yeah, I've experienced at Penn State University. This is not Penn State data, right? Although some people who respond to this might be at Penn State. But frequently or occasionally, I experienced discrimination at my university. That's 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 in here is a lot of people. And so when you look at a lot of people, you're like, whoa, hang on a second. This is serious. This is not a tiny number of people. This is a lot of people. So then we want to say, all right, what obligation do we have to really figure this out? Because 21, I'm going to go back to you. 21 is a high number. If that's true, we're deconstructing it. So it's like still, whoa, hang on a sec. That's a lot. So let's figure it out. So now we're going back the other side to say, no,